Timmy-Jim woke up one day at the age of 12 and a half, maybe 13. It might have been a Thursday. He had been playing in the barn the night before and had seen two glinting eyes in amongst the rusting tools. 9 o'clock shone round on the great clock in the hallway, and he started to protest. "No, never!" His father heard from the other room as Nanny mentioned bed. A slap on the leg brought Timmy round. He was prone to hysterics and cold baths to cure them. His mother had died the year before, and father had retreated to his study, pipe in hand. After an hour of struggle, Timmy was beaten by sleep and curled up amongst the small down cushions on the daybed. He liked to imagine them as clay, moulding to the back of his skull. He put his secrets inside for the beast firing. He always loved the taste of crab meat. His fingers were of butter some days. He opened his eyes in the middle of dreaming that he had been imprisoned. His mother was a matriarch, and he was tripping guards with feet of steel. He felt thorough and planted and new. He was dimly aware of breakfast, an egg or two on dry brown toast, yet his hands were already feeling for change. Compelled to whittle or carve or merely hold a piece of wood, he walked from the kitchen, not washing his hands, to the tool shed in the garden. There he found his grandfather's bone-handled clasp knife. He had always used it to prune, and as a result, the handle was covered in sap and petrified aphids. From there, Timmy clambered up the slope away to the east, leading to the smaller of the three copses that sat on his father's land. He was looking for hazel or something similar, something that could be stripped and bent and worked. In a mystical stupor, Timmy sat, carved and strained for 2 days and nights, sleeping on the soft ferns that grew on the floor of the copse. It was August, and the nights were warmer but damp, yet even the chill of dew couldn't change his course. On the third day, with his father and Nanny exhausted from their search, Timmy emerged from the copse wearing a collar of wood. It was loose enough to hang around his neck, but the two ends of a hazel switch had been split and spliced together, covered in sap, then wrapped in strands of grey-green grass. He had an urge to wear nothing else, and was tackled by Nanny while running naked, save for the collar, through the long grass further to the east. After 4 or 5 swift lashes on the palms with a leather strop, Timmy sat, looking at his hands, wondering why they did not scream out like the roosting crow. His father looked at him, perplexed, as this punishment had been most effective before. 2 more strikes delivered the same blank expression, and his father was forced to concede. Scratching his head, he went inside, took up his pipe, filled the bowl from the pouch that stood on the stool that lay between him and the blackened fireplace, and, pouring in fire from a match, puffed thoughtfully on the blue haze, thinking and looking away. His reverie was interrupted by a startling and intent rapping noise. Knocker, Timmy-Jim's closest friend, was outside, desperate to use the loo. Knocker was often ill-prepared and hasty. He flew in through the door like a hound chasing the scent of a fox. Timmy and Knocker had met when they were but babes in arms. Their mothers had both attended the same sewing circle, which used to meet in the hall behind the church. Post-war rationing made skills in mending and making a necessity. Knocker, also known as Bernie MacLeod, and Timmy shared their earliest memories and were as close as kin. Timmy, however, had always been the ringleader. The backdrop to the day's mayhem having been set many years earlier, Timmy and Knocker conspired to ride out on their bicycles to St. Bees, to dig wildly at the sand, race each other from pool to pool, find mesmerising shells, and do their best to hit seagulls with rocks. No turn should be left unstoned. Timmy pocketed a small packet of waterproof matches that his father had kept from his time in the armed forces. Timmy could see smoke coming from around the door to his father's study, so he tiptoed over the telltale floorboards. Slipping through the doorway, Timmy-Jim felt the lightness of ash on his skin. Timmy and Knocker pedalled the 2 or so miles to St. Bees, their upper lips tasting saltier and saltier as the distance between them and the sea diminished. En route, Timmy's eyes were caught by the barn of Tom Oker, a farmer who mostly kept to himself, and enjoyed picking samphire and other wild fruits and vegetables from the shore. The one point of tension in his otherwise serene life was the age-old feud between himself and the neighbouring family, the Russets. Tom and Gerald Russet hadn't gotten along for longer than either of them cared to or could by this point remember. The tiff had originally started 2 generations back, with an accusation of stolen wheat flying from one farmstead to the other, a distance of 2 or so miles as the crow finds it. Farmer Oker was on his way back from the rocky escarpments, having searched for the pot all morning, when Timmy and Knocker veered off-road towards his barn. Timmy thought there might be a stash of apples somewhere, and scrumping seemed the order of the day. After searching fruitlessly in the well-lit front section of the barn, Timmy led Knocker further into the darker regions under the hayloft, taking the box of waterproof matches from his pocket to light the way. Striking one, Timmy and Knocker stepped deeper into the pitch black. The tips of Timmy's forefinger and thumb prickled, and he shook the match, plunging the pair back into black velvet. Bumping into each other and retracing their steps, the pair admitted unanimous, unspoken defeat, leaving the barn through the northern opening through which they had entered. The ember burned on. A soft snoring issued from the hayloft, accompanied by the percussive rustling of fronds. The youngest russet, Matthew, was sleeping away the afternoon in Tom's hayloft, having snuck away after being left in charge while the rest of the family went to a local cattle auction. He was often to be found there, only to be met with a slap and the business end of his father's boot, who despaired at his youngest son's seemingly endless, idle teenage ennui. This time it was smoke that woke him. Timmy and Knocker were further along the coast road by now, and the rushing sea air blotted out any whiff of burning. The metal ladder lay at the foot of the loft, useless, as flames raced around Matthew on either side. Tom Oker nodded to the marauding pair as he passed them on the coast road, wondering at the wooden collar around Timmy's neck. That boy always was the strange sort, he thought to himself as he carried on walking. He had decided to take the scenic route back, owing to the fine weather. As he rounded the corner that led to his small holding, a faint glow could be seen from behind the main house. He smelt smoke and heard two cries, one from his wife, the other from the barn. Dropping his wicker basket, Tom ran towards the barn, now half alight, and pushed the scalding metal of the doors aside. Grabbing the ladder, cuffs covering hands, he shouted to Matthew to follow the sound of his voice through the smoke. After an eternity of rustling and groaning, the flames dancing along the edges of the barn and through the maze of hay, a foot appeared on the top rung. Tom pulled at the leg, catching the attached young man in both arms and fleeing for the safety of the farmhouse. Having set the boy down on the back step to recover, Tom set about dousing the area around the barn with water to stop the spread of fire. All there was to do now was wait, and manage the flames while they devoured the barn and its contents. Matthew sat still for many hours, watching Tom toil, until the barn was merely a luminous pile, gently chattering and squeaking to itself. Gerald and the rest of the family arrived long after dark to find Matthew missing and a note from Tom's wife on the kitchen table. Rushing to Tom's farm, they found him and Matthew sat by the hearth. Rage quickly gave way to gratitude when Gerald learnt of Tom's heroism. Matthew would be duly punished for napping in the barn, but not tonight. Tonight was a time to give thanks with bowed heads. Paying for a lost barn is one thing, mourning a lost son quite another. In the space of a late afternoon and evening, generations of strife were brought to an end. While this melodrama had been playing itself out at the Oka farm, Timmy and Knocker had been vaulting and running on the beach, causing havoc for the hordes of wildlife. Against all odds, Timmy had managed to hit a hapless seagull and was chasing Knocker over the sand with a bloodied beak. During the game the two had parted, Timmy staying fixedly close to the water, with Knocker retreating to the cliffs that overlooked the northern edge of the beach. They had ranged so far and so wide that neither boy was sure of his own whereabouts, let alone that of his friend. Timmy had rounded the northern tip of the beach and was standing staring into the water. Knocker shouted his name many times but received only the white noise of wind and waves in reply. Had Knocker known that Timmy had walked into the water to meet the grey wolves he saw fighting on the wave tops, he might not have given up his search so easily. As it was, Knocker turned heel and made for the coast road to tell Timmy-Jim's father of his apparent disappearance, taking up his bicycle where he had propped it. Timmy had been staring into the wave tops for a quarter of an hour before he'd seen the first wolf. The wooden collar was chafing his neck in the strong easterly blowing into shore, but he had not noticed. His whole attention was captured by the wolves and the waves and the wolves. They seemed one and pure, and to him, almost holy. A pair of quartz-bright eyes caught his in the 15th minute, and he felt them beckon him. He put 2 or 3 small stones in each trouser pocket and walked into the cold water. He swam and stepped for 20 yards or so before his feet were taken from under him by the swell. Washed backwards, the stones fell from his upturned pockets, and Timmy floated with the wolves, swallowing their howls and feeling the sting of their fangs in his eyes. The tide was on the turn, and Timmy was found 2 hours later. He had been washed around the northern tip of the beach and spat back onto the sand. Breathing but unconscious, his father dragged him from the beach and put him into the back of the car that waited where the sand met tufts of hardy grass. Knocker had ridden fast along the coast road, but had stopped to see the smoke from the ochre place, failing to put two and two together in order to see his own involvement. He was back in the saddle before anyone saw him, and arrived at Timmy's house smelling slightly of sweet smoke, which was covered by Timmy's father's pipe. The pair had raced to the seafront, ignoring the smoke, to find Timmy prone by the water's edge. Once at hospital, Timmy's father relaxed, retiring to the smoking room to sit and ponder the day's events. He sat in a slightly uncomfortable chair by the west-facing window, staring out. He would be sat waiting there for news for the next 2 days as Timmy lay unconscious, attended to by white-clad nurses and taciturn doctors. During those days, time became elastic and uneven around the edges. For Timmy's father, the days were at once interminable and a blur of filled bowls, lit matches, newspapers and radio programs. For Timmy, the days were filled with baffling visions of far-off lands, where men wore falcon feathers in their fur-rimmed hats and shot lethal arrows from stubby bows while on horseback. He saw a murdered half-brother, pyramids of bones, parades of concubines in chains, and heard screams from under the dance hall floor. The beating of a stone gavel swept behind his closed eyes. The beating in his brow grew softer, the stone giving way to the beat of his quaking heart. 2 days vanished into intertemporal dust as Timmy opened his eyes, his final vision of a grey wolf pawing at his left arm morphing into the insistent poking of a nurse. Seeing his eyes flicker and regain their brightness, she turned around, gathering up a plate and utensils. Timmy was offered these, and ate the eggs and dry brown toast greedily, for he was ravenous with hunger, his young muscles having fed his various hallucinations. The plate cleared. Timmy rubbed the skin of his neck where it was still raw. Feeling no collar, he darted his eyes around the room, finally resting them on one of the metal posts of the bed in which he lay. The collar had been cut roughly and hung loosely, bleeding sap. Timmy smiled 12 million square miles and sat back against the pillow. Knocker fell through the door, followed by Timmy's father and Nanny, who both looked tired but relieved. Timmy looked at them and spoke. "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." And then all was silent, and all shall be silent, and all manner of things shall be silent.